Good morning and welcome everybody to our fifth episode of Africa Talks. My IJP colleague Ika and I, we really welcome you for this edition. Africa Talks is designed as a digital platform for exchange of African and European topics, exchange of knowledge and ideas between journalists and experts from civil society from both continents. We want to learn, engage and discuss about what are the impacts and consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Marco Romer, I'm a member of the board of IJP International Journalist Programs, and my colleague Ika is also with me.
Hello, I'm Ika Neumann, the coordinator of the Africa program of the International Journalism Program, and I'm looking forward to discuss today's topic.
Our topic today is COVID-19 deepening gender inequality. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated and added yet another layer of vulnerability to a web of vulnerabilities of girls in the African continent. The pandemic has triggered major concerns about the potential reversal of the strides achieved over the years towards gender equality and human development in Africa. The study, led by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, found that gender-based violence has risen since the COVID-19 pandemic began. What are the specific challenges for African women due to COVID-19? How is the situation on the European continent, or especially in Germany? How to prevent that women to be affected by extreme poverty? These questions we want to raise in our talk right now.
And we are very happy to welcome a set of experts, and I would like to start to introduce to you Memory Kachambwa. She's the Executive Director of FEMNET, the African Women's Development and Communication Network based in Nairobi. She's an intersectional feminist, and as well, she's a women's rights and gender equality activist. Memory has she holds a master in philosophy, as well as in management, as well as integrated water resources. And she has a very rich experience of 18 years in the field of women's and gender issues. So welcome on board for today.
On the other hand, we are more than honored that Anke Petsch is with us. Anke is member of the management board and the director international relations and diversity at the Association of German Foundations. Anke studied German philology and Eastern European studies in Germany, Russia and Czech Republic. She holds a postgraduate degree in public relations and foundation management. Since 2017, she's leading the international work at the Association of German Foundations, where she was before head of communication for many years. She has been and is in charge with numerous national and international affiliate groups of foundation, e.g. Women, international activities, transformative philanthropy, alumni management, communication, and the donors and foundation networks in Europe, DAFNE. Anke is a member of the Responsible Leaders Network of the BMW Foundation, Herbert Quandt, and a trustee at Global Green Grants Fund UK. Welcome to the show, Anke.
And we are very pleased to have Mildred Ngesa. She is an Pan-African transformational leadership coach, gender and communication expert from Kenya. She's got a background in journalism and a long experience in the media, as well as she's a human rights activist and expert. She's been on the Commission of Inquiry into Post-Election Violence in Kenya in 2008. She's been a member of the Commission of the Kenya Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission in 2009. She's been a member of the Commission for the Implementation of the Kenyan Constitution in 2011. And she's a founder of the Peace Pen communications organization, and which she ran from 2008 to 2010. And as well, she's been with Amnesty International for Amnesty International East Africa in the years 2014-15. and she's also the author of books. We might come to that a little later again. Thank you. But welcome, Mildred.
And before we start, we will also introduce our so-called graphic recorder, Wiebke. She is always with us on Africa Talks, and she will try to save the findings and results of our talk in a graphical visualization. Welcome, Wiebke.
Good morning.
Morning.
Furthermore, I will invite all of our participants on Facebook Live or on YouTube to enrich our talk with questions or comments. You can also leave under your stream a question or a comment. But now, memory, the floor is yours. Please be aware that we would like to ask you for a 5 minutes input. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I just want to appreciate you allowing me to be on this station and just to share some of the few views around the experiences that we have been having here in Africa, particularly with the impact of COVID. So 2020, before we were all impacted by the COVID crisis, we had seen 2020 as the year where we were going to be celebrating the gains, but also building the momentum of the Beijing Plus 25. Across Africa, we were prepared to make and push for recommitment for gender, for gender commitments, for gender equality. But with COVID, everything stopped for us in terms of really being able to influence the policy gains that we had. What we saw was a repression of particularly the freedoms that most women had. And we saw how the response to COVID was really initially situated within the health response and not so much looking at the social and the political and the economic aspects of it. What we saw is that not across the African continent, the social protection mechanisms and the structural inputs and investments were very weak. We saw an increase in gender-based violence. A quick example is right here in Kenya. There was a 40% increase in teenage pregnancies. While most of these teenage pregnancies were as a result of defilement, and most of them were as a result of the confinement of the households. So this also really put a spotlight in terms of how unresponsive the social systems were and the things that we as women's rights advocates had been pushing for to ensure that the budgets, the national budgets, are responsive to health, are responsive to social security, and are also invested on issues on ending violence against women across the whole spectrum of the referral. We also saw that most of the women, the houses with the lockdowns, there was a lot of increased police brutality, where, for example, if you made a mistake or if you had to go out and maybe overshoot the curfew, we saw a lot of arrests, a lot of beatings, a lot of undignified response coming from the police. And this was across a lot of countries across Africa. I think another thing is that within this year, we also had a lot of elections which were happening, a lot of processes which were happening across the continent. In Malawi, there were elections, and recently in Tanzania, and we know that Uganda as well. We saw how with everything happening around COVID, there wasn't enough time for expressing and for campaigning because of the current conditions. And this also saw that a lot of women who already are enfranchised disenfranchised when it comes to them going into political office, found another layer of barriers as well. The digital divide also came on as a huge issue, where, for example, in the rural areas where there's no electricity, and everything was happening online. And sometimes you also found out that even though there is a lot of penetration of the mobile devices, most of the women do not own smartphones, which would then allow them to be on Zoom or on some of the platforms as well. So we saw a growth in terms of the divide. But also, we also noticed that the response really differed when it looked at the different intersectionality for women living with disabilities. What they were experiencing was very different. We also saw women in rural areas, women sex workers, gender non-conforming. The increase also in a lot of stigma around that. Migrant workers in South Africa, for example, they were not accessible for getting some of the stimulus packages because most of them were even not registered as well. So there was varied impacts of how COVID, and all this was really pushing back the gains and the gender gains that we had and the provisions as well. I think I will stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, that was for these very interesting insights. So we would now, Anke, it would be your turn. Would you give us your side of the developments and your experiences within the last months and years?
Yeah, listening to the first speaker, of course, the situation in Germany is less dramatic. There is an increase. We can see on hotlines are reporting that 20% of increase of reports on gender on violence. There are still missing statistics on how if there's a really if this increase. Well, the number is much more known now, and the neighbors are at home, so they can report better. But there still is a lack of statistic of this. But I'm sure there is this increase. So it's always difficult if you don't have these numbers, and I see this lack of in the German statistics always that if you don't count what is gender-based and what not, you can't really talk about it. So that's why some of the foundations try to raise awareness about this. And for instance, one German foundation, the Malisa Foundation, surveyed that in COVID times, twice as many men were featured on television and media. And of course, this isn't a reason when in this first expert group of scientifics, there have been 24 men and only 2 women. So they did not care about how to deal with when the schools are closed, who will care home for the kids. I see there was also a huge opportunity for parents to think and maybe divide the work better, but I know that in many cases this was not done. Yeah, maybe this is what I can say for now. I mean, the German foundations, they usually fund only in Germany, and that's only we have 26,000 foundations in Germany, but only 2,000 work internationally. And what we could see is that there's not the most they go along with their existing partners, but there was no new means given to to regions where it is most needed.
Thank you, Anke. I think we will go deeper into that thing. How might be the role of foundations to strengthen the role of gender equality in our discussion later. Now, I would give the floor for Mildred. We have heard from Memory's perspective already. What would be your perspective?
Thank you very much, Marco, and a big thank you to my colleagues in the panel who have very well captured how 2020 was. For me, I would look at 2020 as an opportunity for redefining how gender issues in the continent and of course across the world are being captured, articulated, implemented, and of course transformed. And so we have seen 2020 where at the onset of the pandemic, not only in Africa but across the world, the response to the pandemic failed initially to look at the gendered aspects of the pandemic, but which later on picked up, of course, from the work by civil society organizations and other stakeholders and players like Femnet that works across 47 African countries in the continent and beyond, to infuse the consciousness of engendering the pandemic. And so my entry point is to talk about how we have seen the opportunity to engender the COVID-19 pandemic in a way that brings out the status and realities of women and girls in Africa, how they are impacted, and the opportunities that ought to be brought into the fore. Memory has captured quite a bit of that, but I would like to bring out what has also stood out for me, the aspect of the mental health issues encapsulated in a pandemic that is already submerging the plight of women and girls across Africa with their needs and necessities, because we know the gaps have always been glaring in terms of gender issues, provision of services and service delivery, but now 2020 has brought out even more glaring gaps into the health sector, and not only in terms of providing critical services such as SRHR, sexual reproductive health rights, but also on issues of mental services and health needs within our communities in Africa. We have also seen an increase on issues of cyberbullying and attacks on women. The gendered aspects of cyberbullying and attacks are more heavier felt by women and girls online, ironically at a time during the pandemic where we are all forced to largely work online. We have also seen the glaring impacts of the pandemic on the education sector. Memory has alluded to the fact that the increasing cases of child pregnancies in schools. But what we have also seen is the challenge to how these messages and communications is packaged, in that, for example, when we are talking about increased numbers of young girls falling out of school because of pregnancies or being impregnated while at home during this lockdown period, our focus is on the fact that the girls are pregnant, but not on the fact that there are men who are preying on the young girls. And so we are seeing an opportunity where the communications dynamics as to how this is packaged within the pandemic is changing and must change to focus on the fact that it is not 30,000 girls who are pregnant at this time of lockdown, but it is 30,000 sexual offenders, predators, rapists, or men who have taken advantage of 30,000 girls in a setup of vulnerability, of whom society must focus on and say we have a problem. That right in the middle of a pandemic, 30,000 girls are at risk of being threatened and attacked by 30,000 sexual offenders, or if we are able to formulate the message in a way that not only spotlights the girls as victims, but actually points out at the perpetrators for the sake of transforming and changing this kind of risk factors. And so I do see a lot of opportunities within this period, even amidst the pandemic, for the seriousness of the gaps of gender inequality to be brought out, to be addressed, to be articulated, and therefore to be transformed for the purpose of change for Africa's women and girls, not only in Africa, of course, but replicated across the globe. I would like to also quickly mention that we have seen the fact that we have a pandemic globally that respects no borders or no boundaries at all. So it affects everyone from the Bundus of the remotest parts of Africa to the highest concrete cities of Europe or across the world. We have seen it is no respecter of borders. And so we have understood the importance of how we reach out in terms of intercepting global problems and pandemics, that if there is poverty somewhere in Africa that is not being addressed, it will affect a city in Berlin if it is not being addressed, especially in the midst of a pandemic. 2020 has actually exposed the gaps in our health sectors and what needs to be done. It has exposed the gaps between policy documents and the reality on the ground. And therefore, I see the opportunities that can be used to galvanize not only African societies, but global societies as a whole towards actual transformation and development. I stop there.
Thank you, Mildred. I would have a question to you, a first question. What you touched on one topic which we had in one of our last sessions when we dealt with education. We learned, and you touched on it both, Mildred and Memory, that the impregnation of girls is on the rise. So on our last episode, we were talking to specialists from the education sector who then addressed that, for example, in Malawi, there are cases reported an increase of 40,000 girls being impregnated. So would you see the needs to change in be it the educational sector, the political sector, and very, very concrete steps? What would your recommendations be that those things are stopped and that they are prevented and that there is future for education for young girls and these things won't happen? Memory, would you want to start first?
Thank you so much. I think one of the first thing is to realize that what we are seeing are the symptoms of a system that is not responsive and a system that has not invested in dealing with the structural and systemic causes of gender-based violence. So I think first is to name, I think I really like what Mildred said in terms of changing the narrative and really pointing to the perpetrators and the instigators of stopping the lives of and the future of the girls. So when, for example, if you are defiled, if you are impregnated at 14, at 16, it means that when you look at your life, what you could have achieved in your lifetime, there has been a delay. But for some children, and for some of the girls, they will not even be going back to school. So I think the first is to really first admit that this is a violation of the rights of girls. And then the second thing will be also to look at some of the negative social norms and practices that really needs to be addressed, that really needs to be encountered. So the discourse should be saying, when we have guardians, of which most of the perpetrators are people who are known to the girls. So these are the guardians whose sole responsibility should be providing protection for the girls. So when we have a society that now looks at girls as in the view as possible partners for sexual encounter, I think that's something that we really need to start addressing and bringing out to the fore, and having these dialogues and debates that say why we need to address the issues of power over, that the patriarchal system is an unhealthy system that promotes, and a system that also legislates. So you find for some of the perpetrators, there are negotiations by the parents themselves for these girls to be married off. And, and the case is not, and a lot of the cases are being withdrawn from the police. But just that awareness and really questioning what sort of society that we have and how we can deal with that. So we have gatekeepers who will still want to maintain and, even say, no, but these girls were raped because they were loose, because they allowed it, and continuously not believe the survivors, blame them. And also a society where, people start pointing at the girls, but not taking responsibility. So taking responsibility is one thing that really needs to be addressed. And prosecution of the perpetrators. A lot of the cases were reported, and most of the cases that came out, particularly, I think the issue of the teenage pregnancies is really interesting, because most of the cases were not even reported until the health workers, in their records, they started recording underage girls were pregnant. So it means that we are not even reporting the cases. So in most cases of gender-based violence, a lot of them go unreported. And by not going unreported, it's creating a culture which tolerates, a culture which allows, and start already, safeguarding some of those violations. So we should really be out there strong, denouncing, prosecuting, and having campaigns where, if the neighbor, implementing all these policies that we have on ground. So I think what is really practical is also the investment. So we've seen not much investment happening, particularly for responding and prevention of gender-based violence. And most of the organizations, it's not even the state which has mechanisms for response, but it's mostly women's rights organizations, NGOs, and civil society, which are the ones who are at the front line of really ensuring that they provide the shelters and also the referral pathway once a violation has been done. So I think those are some of the practical. So the awareness, building the consciousness, taking responsibility, putting money where it matters in terms of prevention, and also working collectively in dismantling this culture that really tolerates, accepts, and having people who say they'll marry off a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. That should really be unacceptable. And we should start building a culture of saying this is not acceptable. We should also be looking at some of the underlying power issues and say the reason why this happens is because patriarchy allows and gives power for perpetrators to use women and to see women as sex objects, and to also repress their expression and make them and instigate all the cases of gender-based violence that we are seeing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'll stop for now.
May I ask one additional question, Memory? I would come to the question of representation of women in your country. Are there enough women in leadership positions, not only in business or companies, but also in government and society? And could that help to change what you have described so far?
So I think what we have seen, for example, in Rwanda has the highest number of women in parliament in the world, with over 60% of women in leadership. And we've really seen how that has helped in terms of upholding implementation of some of the gender provisions within their policies, but also within the region and also globally. So yes, once there are more women who are in leadership, but I think that I should say this with a caveat to also say that it's one thing to have women in leadership, but it's also important to change the structure. So if the structure has not changed in terms of maybe if there are no response centers, if there are no call centers, so if the structure is not responsive in terms of dealing with issues of gender-based violence, then even if you have more women in leadership, but the structure does not allow, when they're negotiating national budgets, there's no money which is going in terms of dealing with issues of gender-based violence, then that won't help much. So it should be two-pronged, to have more women who are in leadership, but to also ensure that even the women themselves who are in leadership are championing in addressing the structural issues, so that, at schools, there's equal opportunities, addressing the barriers for girls to go to school, making sure even the workplaces have policies which allow women not to be harassed, and also addressing those issues and making sure it's, the political will just doesn't remain with women as the burden, but even all the leaders who are elected and who are serving people in their communities, they also take it up as a responsibility for them. Because we also find out that sometimes women who are in leadership, and most of the times they're also few, they also now carry the burden of dealing with something which is systematic, and sometimes there's actually not enough infrastructure to support them. I hope I've answered you on that.
Thank you very much. I think you answered very well on that. Mildred, I have got a question. Since you are the transformational leadership coach, from your perspective, what does it need to create framework conditions for women to thrive and to narrow the gender gap?
Thank you, Ek. I think what we need, we already have. What we need, we already have. And this period of the COVID pandemic, some of the very first responders to the COVID pandemic are women working in informal sectors and in rural areas. That the women rose up and said, wait a minute, so the government has declared the pandemic is here. What do we do as women to lead our communities towards safety? And the women started mobilizing in groups, of course, keeping distance, of course, sending messages on text, collecting what needs to be collected, trying to put water points where governments maybe had failed to produce water, trying to provide food for those who are vulnerable, trying to pull together what they can to reach out to those who are unreachable at this point, trying to send messages of urgency, trying to create safe corridors for women who are in need of maternal care. Some of the most impacting memories or visuals I have is of women in the informal settlements, in the slum areas, where they have formed corridors or passages for pregnant women who are in need of care to reach the midwives in the community, and if in need of getting into urgent medical needs, to try to get them away to reach the hospitals. So what I'm saying is that the leaders, the women leaders, have always been there. How do we galvanize this to feed into national action policies and frameworks that can be infused and internalized and therefore used and implemented? The passages for this, the framework for this kind of network and leadership has always been with the women, and memory will tell you. Not only in Kenya, but across the entire African continent. When women organize and mobilize, they know how they want to reach the next one who is in need. They know how they want to push the message across. What we have discovered during this COVID pandemic is that the voices of the women has always been there. Women always had their voices, but who was listening? Who was listening to the voices of the women when the women spoke? So now the COVID pandemic has pushed the bar a little bit more, that you should listen to what the women have been saying about the gaps that they have, about what they're facing, about the challenges, the risk, the threats that they have been having. If this year, 2020, is when we were marking the Beijing plus 25 framework of action, not only Beijing, but quite a number of regional, national frameworks that were bringing together gender needs and gender gaps that governments and countries had to come together and act upon, 25 years. It means that for the longest time before COVID, women have been trying to say something. that there is a gap here in our needs, our security, our education, our reproductive health rights, that there's been a gap. The leadership of women to get this out has always been there. The question, Eka, is who has been listening when women have been pushing the bar, saying we have these gaps. And so for me, I see that 2020 within the COVID pandemic has just confirmed what the women have always known, that there has been a gap that you have been ignoring. So now the pandemic is here with us. What are we doing about it? What are you going to do about it? What it presents, in my view, is the opportunity for governments to plug into those gaps and actually bring out the realization of the rights that women have been pushing for. What I see is also the opportunity for governments to realize and understand that there was never a need to put in two dimensions of humanity, that men are up here and women are down here. There is a reality of addressing the patriarchal lines that reduced women to lesser people, to lesser beings in the community, and in fact bring out what is the reality of the being, that patriarchy really has no room when we are talking about equality and equal opportunities. And so leadership, when we bring it out as transformational leaders and transformational, ambitious looking African women looking forward, is to say that we, after 2021 December, 2020, after 2020 December, 2021 January, should not find African women where they were before the pandemic. It would be a shame for African governments to say that we still cannot provide water for women who need it. It would be a shame for our governments to say we still do not have enough health care to deal with maternal issues when our women need it. It would be a shame to say that we still have women living at risk of security and threats in our communities post the pandemic. It would be a shame. And so the leadership that we bring within our transformational perspective in the pandemic is the leadership that wants to see tangible change. We have cried enough. 25 years has been enough putting, and we are just talking 25 years because that's where we are at, acknowledging. But of course it's been there since we were born, and many of us were born double 25 years before. So we understand that this is the time where tangible change and transformation ought to be seen. We can't step into 2021 singing the same cries and needs of women in Africa. So for us is to push the bar, that there has to be a change, that there has to be a transformation. The narrative must change. And that's why when I began, I said, it is not 30,000 girls who are impregnated. It is 30,000 rapists, defilers, incestors, men out there who are attacking 30,000 girls. We have to change that narrative so that we put it into perspective, so that things have to shift.
Thank you, Mildred. I think we hear your voice, and we hear what you want to say. And we already said that the situation in Europe, or especially in Germany, is maybe not comparable to the situation in many African countries. But I would like to bring Anke into our discussions. And here in Germany, some people are afraid that due to COVID-19, the role of women is getting back into that more or less traditional role we had. So women taking care about their children, are in the kitchen and so on. Anke, would you confirm these fears, or what is your opinion on that?
Well, I have the same fear somehow, because, for instance, if you look at how many women have to care as a single parent for children, it's 9 of 10 single parents are women, and in Germany it's quite common to be separated. So there is a lot of work to be done by women, and these numbers of how much homework is to be done by women have been always higher than what men have to do. And there is a hope, and I think this opportunity that men who are now home with their wives can change their behavior is huge. But I can't say, well, you can't really talk about something what you don't have in numbers. So there is still no statistic about it. but I think what you read is that of course a lot of women still have to do these things, and we need a cultural change about the role of care work. That this is not a female thing, that men also can care about elderly people, and that men can also do part-time work, and not this is things what still is unequal for women, and due to the pandemic it will be larger problem again if we don't address it and if we don't talk about it.
Follow-up
You have made
question
this
to you.
point. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just maybe
I have
one
a follow-up question.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question, Hanke, because memory touched a topic I think earlier on, which was finances. So and being in the sector of foundations, where there's where you have the options of funding and funding mechanisms, would you think, from your perspective, that there is enough focus on financing these questions which we stressed, which are also applicable in Europe, in Germany, gender-based violence, the gender gap, and those topics? Do you think, from your perspective, there's enough focus put on financial mechanisms?
And one additional question, because it's directly to that point. Sorry to interrupt here as a man, this discussion. Sorry about that, but like I think it fits, because my question was, could it be a task of foundations to bring these kind of numbers and figures where you have expressed that we have not enough numbers and figures to describe the problem, and could that be a role of foundations to deliver these numbers by studies, by whatever? That would be my additional question.
Yes, of course. I mean, there is a study going ahead next year, what giving because in the case of rape in Germany, we know that only 5% will be reporting these, and there will be a huge study by the criminal, I don't know, institute. But additional studies financed by foundation is, of course, something foundations can do, and some do, but we see there is still a lack of understanding what gender mainstreaming is, gender budgeting, because these huge foundation often don't have this intersectional approach. There's one huge foundation which entered now this and took inequality first time to their main purposes by using an intersectional approach. And I hope that this example of a bigger foundation will help us to advocate for this, and also for this aspect of who has the power to decide, and why not to shift the power and give and discuss about what is needed more with people who need this help and who know the problems, because still the German foundation sector is quite elitary in a way. There's a overrepresentation of men in the leadership, and we have this power dynamic questions. And if we as an association, we started to introduce a voluntary framework for a foundation, and we had discussed with our members. We have 4,600 members. We had to discuss that foundations should care about equality. So they did not want to really put it into their agenda. They said, yeah, we will try to address it, but they don't say we as a foundation have this role. We have to address it. We have to find the solutions. We have to think about gender budgeting, and they have, of course, this possibility to think about where to use their endowment, how to use their endowments, and how to invest it. So every foundation, even if they don't have in their purposes women and girls as a target group, they can do something for women and girls. And we are still in the discussion of introducing this, and it seems to be a big step still to do.
I would have a follow-up question, one more follow-up question, and maybe then we can open up to the others again. Do you think women tap enough into their support mechanisms, and I'm just thinking of a lot of networks men tap into, and a lot of organizations which are dominated by men. Do you think that women have enough support mechanisms, and if not so, how could those be strengthened, or where do you see a need, if you see a need there?
Well, if you look for it, there are a lot of female networks raised in the last time, and still showing up new ones. Networking is one thing, but I mean, this doesn't help if you still have inequalities at home. So if the woman has no time to go out for networking or to go online this time, then it doesn't help. And also some of these networks where maybe more important discussions are going on, they are not always include women. So of course they can build up their own network, but we don't have to think about it in a separate way. So I think we have to we have to include more men in this discussion, and not. I don't think that there is, of course, giving more support is needed, and for this we need the understanding of decision makers, and for this is also important to include more women in the leadership in order to have more decision makers who think about women. But I don't think that only networking is the thing what is needed.
Anke, I would like to add a question to our African colleagues in this discussion, and certainly you might know we have certain quotas for women representation when it comes to the board of companies or corporations. We do not have quotas for the management levels. Would you think that fixed quotas, statutory quotas, could be a solution to raise and to increase representation of women in positions in your countries?
Yeah, I can start on that one. Thanks, Marco, for that question. I think the issue of quotas is quotas are placed to address a particular gap in terms of representation or an inequality for a particular, to redress that issue for a particular period of time. And we've really seen this really working in terms of where quotas have been put in place when they are legislated. But what we have also seen is that it's one thing to have quotas in place, but it's also important to also make efforts in terms of redressing why women have the barriers to be in those positions. So when it comes to, for example, most of the companies, private sector companies, that don't have women on their boards or in their management, they usually say it's because the women are not qualified. So we need to put the quotas first in place, but also then start addressing some of the issues and some of the invisible issues that most women will have the education, will have the training, but when it comes to opportunity and making decisions in terms of would they stay at home and take care of their children, that care work is usually not put into perspective. I think Mildred mentioned the issue of well-being and self-care. And when you look at the corporate sector, those are issues and standards which are almost like an insult to say, what do you mean when it comes to well-being and, you know, self-care? We know that most in these corporates, most of the decisions are made at clubs, are made in places where most women are not even there. So even when they are put on the boards, some of the decisions are made in spaces where, you know, they are not there. So making sure that those things are really addressed in terms of shifting and transforming the workplace as a place which can be a place for family, a place where the demands are also inconsiderate of some of the multiple roles. So where you find where men have to take care of children, pick up children from school, and do some of the care work that puts a lot of burden on women. If that is transformed, then you see even more women performing so much better. But quota systems really go a long way. I think affirmative action as a principle, if implemented well, allows for readdressing the gap, for readdressing the injustice, and making sure that those that would ordinarily not have a place or would ordinarily not have an opportunity to assume those roles are able to do so. So affirmative action should go, I think what I'm just saying is it should go in line with addressing those injustices so that we can get to an egalitarian society and we can get to a point where the systems allow and are dealing with some of the barriers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I hear there is some, if I got it right, there's some similarities, because I think, Anke, you also touched on that taking care of children and women who are single parents, that's an extra burden, so that we have to, that those question needs to be tackled there. Mildred, would you, and I'd address you again as a transformational leader, how to get there? Quick and fast.
Quick and it makes a lot of sense. But you know, the war that you fight when you want to bridge that inequality is the war that we all fear, because it actually opens up a can of worms to address the why, that there are gaps. And that is why we have to bring in the quota system. That is why we have to fill in these areas where the women were missing. The why is because of patriarchy. And the fact that women traditionally, culturally, I put it in quotes, were not regarded as full, wholesome human beings. Now that is the dismantling we have to begin dismantling. Before we say that we have a quota system, an affirmative action system where we have to have more women put in because they have been missing, we have to discuss the why. So transformation begins from addressing the why. And the why means that, and I will talk to Marco right now, that Marco as a father or as a husband looks around and wonders, but why is my daughter not getting the same opportunity to pursue medical school as the way my son is getting the same opportunity, and starts questioning that. And so the why also means that we have to make our societies and communities understand that the perception that women are not able must die at the foot of affirmative action. The perception that you give women roles as a token must die at the foot of affirmative action, because women are able and women have every right to actually occupy all these positions. But I want to also say this, and this emphasis must be clear and be brought out, that it must be understood that when we are talking about equality and equal opportunities, it addresses genders in a way that dignifies women who have been indignified because of these perceptions for a long time. And so the war that we fight, and I call it a war because honestly, when you're trying to address these things, it's actually getting into a war, and memory will tell you that across African cultures, across societies and perceptions, it is a war because patriarchy is very defiant. It is defiant in the face of, no, women are not allowed to do this. No, women should not come to this position. So the war that we fight is to curtail patriarchy at the root. And the root we are talking about is how the lifestyle and perception has always been. And when we curtail it, we explain thoroughly, to respond to Marco's question, why it is important to instill this quota system so that the gaps that have been there have to be filled until we are at an equal plate. What we try to make our communities understand is that in a cabinet that has 35 ministers and you have only 2 female ministers, there is a problem, and you have to be uncomfortable with that. That when you, ECA, are hosting a panel discussing Africa's leadership, democracy and governance, and you have a panel that has 5 men and 1 woman, there is a problem still. Now today we are talking about the issues of women and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And rightfully so, we have the women discussing those issues. But it would be important to understand that every time you have a panel discussing any issue of importance, not only in Africa, of course across the world, and in Germany as well, that you have to be very uncomfortable when they're talking development, marketing, insurance, whatever, and the whole panel has 6 men dressed in dark suits and there's no woman in there. There's a problem, because then that means there is a voice that is being shut out. So there has to be a heightened consciousness into equality to bridge the gender gap. There has to be a heightened consciousness. Yes.
Thank you, Mildred. I will take that along and keep that in consideration. Thank you very much. I have a question from the audience. We have Nele Posthausen, who has a question posed, and let me read it to you. Her question is how, if there is the official dialogue which is there, how women are, how the position of women is during the pandemic. Are journalists, female journalists, are they writing about the topics? Are they pushing forward these topics? She would like to know if there's any activities which are there happening right now.
There are quite a number of activities with female journalists, and they've really, really heightened their position in highlighting the issues of female journalists. But I also need to remind her that the patriarchy we fight is also in the newsroom, that our news desks are also patriarchal, that our newsrooms are also patriarchal. So the female journalists in newsrooms, we take into consideration that they actually also fight multiple aspects of patriarchy, even to get their stories on board. Over the years, we have worked extensively with engendering the news desks. Engendering the news desks so that issues of women and girls are spotlighted in a way that is transformative and is prioritized. We know that in many newsrooms, and Marco will understand it, women issues are thrown in between the pages of newspapers towards the end or in a pullout that is not prioritized. Now, the work that we have is to actually push the women to the forefront. Now, media ownership is extremely patriarchal. You get very few women at the top of media ownership, and that's problematic. Now, media leadership and management is also patriarchal. The Editors Guild have 80% men, 20% women. So therefore, it tells you how women issues and women news is packaged in the newsroom. And so it is a process that we cannot let go of, and we must keep pushing our finger there, so that the women's voices in the newsrooms are also coming out as strongly and as powerfully as they ought to be. And therefore, in doing that, connecting it with the women working on the grassroots. So therefore, connecting we in media with memory, working with women on the ground across the CS, so that we can push this news aspect to be on the priority. Yes, we can get feelers and small feedback within. No, but it has to be at the priority. If we have our 30 girls being impregnated, it has to be the news break, not the political play. But how do we do that? How do we get that on the forefront? Very important there.
Yes, thank you very much. And we have a look at how, from this lively discussion and from these very interesting insights, how Wiebke Koch, our graphic recorder, what she got from it. Maybe we can have a look what she's been doing in the meantime while we were talking. Okay. Wiebke, please, what have you grasped from this hour's talk?
First of all, I am impressed by the quality of this talk, and I'm very, very happy that there is 3 women on the panel this time. So thanks for that. And I think there is the main thing is here around not just discussing the symptoms like the girls being impregnated and the girls being the victims and all of that, but to shift the focus from the victim to the perpetrator and prosecute instead of just taking the girls to get married or blaming the girls even. I mean, we've talked about that widening gap quite a few times already in this series of talks with the undignified police response and that many cases of rape and violence actually go unreported. But what was new for me was the role of women leadership here in this, what the opportunity can be in this problem in terms of dismantling this culture of patriarchy once and for all in the newsrooms, in the corporations, in the homes, to also bring in the men to care for the children. And also what I found very interesting was, Anke, your comment about the role of foundations and an intersectional approach to gendering this COVID-19 response. I really like that language as well, and gendering the COVID-19 response. I think I'll stop there for now, but obviously I'll still clean it up and then this can be uploaded on the website.
Okay, thank you very much, Wiebke.
Exactly, thank you, Wiebke. And I don't want to have the last word, so I give over to Ika, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's been very inspiring. It's been very emotional, passionate discussion, and very uplifting discussion this week. And I think we can take towards the next week, because we are running a series, and you mentioned media, and we also got the question from Nele Posthausen when you mentioned media. So that is our topic which we touch next week. So, and we will make sure that we also address those questions raised here and take them to the newsrooms and ask the editors and the journalists who will take part how their approach towards women and reporting will be. So we'll take that to the next sessions, but also to the following topics which are still to come. So thank you very much. And I think 1 hour is really, really short. So we try to get it as dense and cut up as possible. But I can see there is, as for many other topics as well, there is need to go into those topics deeper and maybe also to link and exchange and get connected. So we will work on that and also get you connected in the end. Thank you very much for being there. Thank you very much, Mildred. Thank you very much, Memory. Thank you very much, Anke. It's been a pleasure to have you all.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Bye-bye. Good luck.